The October rain drummed against the windows of my cramped bedsit in Bethnal Green as I carefully wrapped the small wooden box. My hands trembled slightly, not from the cold that seemed to seep through every crack in the Victorian terrace, but from anticipation. Tonight was Sarah's birthday party, and after 3 months of dating, I wanted to give her something truly meaningful. I'd met Sarah at a charity gala in Mayfair, where I was working as a waiter. She was everything I wasn't: polished, sophisticated, from a wealthy family in Surrey. Her laugh could light up a room, and somehow, miraculously, she'd agreed to go out with me, Tom Williams, a 28-year-old struggling artist from East London. The gift wasn't expensive. I couldn't afford expensive. My part-time job at the gallery in Shoreditch barely covered rent, let alone lavish presents, but this wasn't about money. Inside the weathered oak box lay my grandfather's war medal, a distinguished flying cross he'd earned during the Battle of Britain. It was the only valuable thing I owned, passed down when he died 5 years ago. I'd spent weeks crafting a story around it. Not the real story, that would come later, but a romantic tale about how it represented my commitment to her, how I wanted to give her something that meant everything to me. The truth was more complicated, more painful, and far more beautiful. My phone buzzed. "Can't wait to see you tonight. The gang's all excited to meet you properly. SX, the gang." Sarah's university friends from Cambridge, all lawyers, bankers, and consultants, who spoke in acronyms and measured success by salary figures. They'd been polite enough during our brief encounters, but I could see it in their eyes, the question of what Sarah was doing with someone like me. I tucked the box into my jacket pocket and headed out into the drizzle. The tube journey from Bethnal Green to Chelsea felt like crossing into another world. The Georgian terraces grew grander, the cars more expensive, and my second-hand suit felt increasingly inadequate. Sarah's flat was a ground-floor apartment in a converted Victorian mansion, all high ceilings and period features that probably cost more per month than I earned. Through the tall windows, I could see the party already in full swing. Wine glasses catching the light, designer dresses, perfectly styled hair. I rang the bell, my heart hammering. "Tom!" Sarah opened the door, radiant in a midnight blue dress that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She kissed me lightly, her perfume expensive and intoxicating. "You look lovely. Come in. Everyone's dying to see you." The living room was warm and bright, filled with the kind of confident chatter that comes from people who've never worried about money. I recognized some faces from previous encounters. James, the investment banker with his booming laugh. Sophie, the barrister who always seemed to be analyzing everyone. Marcus, whose family apparently owned half of Yorkshire. "Tom," James approached with a gin and tonic in hand. "Good to see you, mate. How's the art world treating you?" There it was, the subtle condescension wrapped in friendliness. "Can't complain," I replied, accepting a beer from a passing waiter. "Still painting, still hoping." "That's the spirit." Sophie joined us, her sharp bob perfectly framed around her angular face. "Sarah tells us you've got a piece in a group show next month." "How exciting!" The way she said exciting made it sound like I'd entered a primary school competition, but I smiled and nodded, used to these interactions by now. Sarah appeared at my elbow, squeezing my arm affectionately. "Are you being nice to my boyfriend?" she teased her friends. "Always." Marcus grinned, but his eyes remained calculating. "We're just getting to know him better." The evening progressed with the usual rhythm of these gatherings. I found myself in corners having stilted conversations about house prices and holiday destinations I couldn't afford. Sarah flitted between groups, the perfect hostess, occasionally catching my eye with an encouraging smile. As the night wore on, I began to relax slightly. The beer helped, and I found myself genuinely enjoying a conversation with Sophie about legal aid cuts, a topic where my East London upbringing actually gave me insight they lacked. Then came the moment I'd been both anticipating and dreading. "Present time," Sarah announced, clapping her hands together. The room gathered around the ornate coffee table where a pile of beautifully wrapped gifts waited. Boxes from Harrods, bags from Bond Street boutiques, the kind of presents that screamed money and status. I watched as Sarah opened gift after gift, a silk scarf from Hermes, a weekend at a spa in the Cotswolds, expensive jewelry that sparkled under the chandelier. Each gift was received with genuine delight, kisses exchanged, photographs taken for Instagram. My hand found the small wooden box in my pocket. Suddenly, it felt incredibly small, incredibly inadequate. "There's one more," I said quietly, my voice almost lost in the general chatter. Sarah turned to me, eyes bright with anticipation. "From you?" I pulled out the box, its weathered wood looking ancient and shabby next to all the glossy packaging. The room fell quiet, conversations trailing off as everyone focused on this unexpected addition to the gift pile. "It's not much," I began, my carefully prepared speech suddenly feeling clumsy in my mouth. "But it means something special to me." Sarah took the box, turning it over in her hands with a slight frown. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Someone coughed. A glass clinked against a table. She opened it. The metal lay nestled in faded blue velvet, its bronze surface dull with age. The ribbon was frayed at the edges, the colors faded from decades of careful storage. Next to the gleaming jewelry and expensive accessories scattered around the room, it looked like something from a charity shop. Sarah stared at it for a long moment. Then, incredibly, she began to laugh. It started as a snort, quickly suppressed, but then bubbled up uncontrollably. Sarah's shoulders shook as she tried to contain herself, one hand pressed to her mouth, but the laughter escaped anyway, high and bright and utterly devastating. The room held its breath. I felt my face burning, my stomach dropping through the expensive wooden floors into the basement below. This wasn't how I'd imagined it. This wasn't how any of it was supposed to go. "I'm sorry," Sarah gasped between giggles. "I don't mean to laugh. It's just—" She held up the medal, dangling it from its frayed ribbon. "Tom, darling, what is this exactly?" The condescension in her voice cut deeper than any blade. The casual dismissal, the public humiliation. It was every nightmare I'd ever had about these people, about this world I was trying so desperately to fit into. "It's a war medal," I managed, my voice hoarse. "Distinguished Flying Cross." "Right." James stepped closer, peering at the medal with the kind of expression one might use when examining a questionable piece of modern art. "Bit random, isn't it? Where'd you get it? Car boot sale?" More snickers around the room. Sophie was trying to hide her smirk behind her wine glass. Marcus was openly grinning, clearly delighted by this turn of events. Even the caterers had stopped what they were doing to watch the spectacle. "It's vintage, I suppose," Sarah said, still fighting back laughter. "Though I'm not sure what I'm meant to do with it. Put it on my mantelpiece? Wear it to the office?" The laughter was spreading now, rippling through the room like a contagious disease. These people who'd been politely tolerating me all evening were finally seeing what they'd suspected all along. That I was different, that I didn't belong, that I was beneath them. I thought it was meaningful, I said quietly, but my words were lost in the general mirth. "Oh, Tom." Sarah reached out and patted my arm, the gesture somehow more insulting than outright mockery. "You're so sweet, so earnest. But really, darling, a rusty old medal? What were you thinking?" What was I thinking? I was thinking about my grandfather, who'd been barely 19 when he'd climbed into a Spitfire and faced down the Luftwaffe over the English Channel. I was thinking about the stories he'd told me as a child, about courage and sacrifice, and doing what's right, even when you're terrified. I was thinking about love and meaning, and the things that actually matter in this world. But looking around this room full of privileged faces twisted with amusement, I realized how naive I'd been. These people didn't understand meaning. They understood price tags and brand names and social currency, but they had no comprehension of actual value. "Perhaps there's a story behind it?" Sophie suggested, her legal training making her probe deeper, even as she maintained her superior smile. "Some romantic tale about why you thought Sarah would want a piece of military memorabilia?" All eyes turned to me expectantly. This was it, my moment to explain, to share the beautiful lie I'd constructed about commitment and devotion. But standing there, surrounded by their smug faces, I found I couldn't do it. The words stuck in my throat like sawdust. I started, then stopped. My hands were shaking now, and I could feel sweat beading on my forehead despite the October chill seeping through the windows. "Come on, then," Marcus encouraged, enjoying every second of my discomfort. "Don't keep us in suspense. What's the story behind the trinket?" Trinket? That word hit me like a physical blow. This medal, this symbol of everything my grandfather had given, everything my family had sacrificed, reduced to a trinket by someone who'd probably never worked a day in his life, never faced any real hardship, never had to choose between heating and eating. Sarah was looking at me with a mixture of embarrassment and impatience, clearly wanting this awkward moment to pass so the party could return to normal. The medal dangled from her fingers like a dead thing. "Well," she prompted. I opened my mouth to deliver my prepared speech, but what came out instead was the truth. Not the romantic version I'd planned, but the raw, painful reality that I'd been carrying alone for so long. "That medal belonged to my grandfather," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Flight Lieutenant Charlie Williams, Royal Air Force. He earned it during the Battle of Britain." The laughter began to fade, replaced by a kind of uncomfortable attention. But I wasn't finished. "He was shot down over Kent in September 1940. Managed to bail out, but he was badly burned. Spent 6 months in hospital getting skin grafts, learning to walk again. The moment he was cleared for duty, he went back up." Sarah's smile was wavering now, the medal no longer swinging from her fingers but held more carefully. "He flew 37 more sorties before the war ended. Never talked much about it. But sometimes, when he'd had a pint or two, he'd tell me stories. About friends who didn't come back. About being so scared he'd wet himself in the cockpit. About the night London was burning and they could see the flames from 20,000 feet. The room was completely silent now. Someone had set down their glass with unusual care. After the war, he came back to East London, worked in the docks for 40 years, raised 3 children on a docker's wage. Never complained, never asked for recognition, just got on with it, like his generation did. I looked directly at Sarah, meeting her eyes for the first time since she'd started laughing. When he died 5 years ago, this was the only thing of value he left behind. Not money, not property, not stocks and shares. Just this medal and the story that goes with it. The story of a teenager who faced down the Luftwaffe and helped save this country from fascism. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant sound of traffic on the King's Road. Sarah was staring at the medal now, as if seeing it for the first time. "I gave it to you," I continued, "because I wanted you to understand who I am, where I come from, what I value. I paused, swallowing hard. "I thought you'd understand what it meant for me to share that with you." But even as I spoke, I could see in their faces that they didn't understand. Not really. They were uncomfortable now, perhaps even ashamed of their laughter, but they still didn't get it. To them, it was still just an old piece of metal, made slightly more interesting by its backstory, but no more valuable than before. The difference was that now they felt bad about laughing at it. The silence that followed my words was different from the expectant quiet that had preceded Sarah's laughter. This was heavy, uncomfortable. The kind of silence that makes people shift in their seats and study their shoes. The party's cheerful energy had evaporated, replaced by an awkward tension that seemed to thicken the very air. Sarah stood frozen, the medal cradled in her palms like something precious and fragile. Her face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely uncertain. "Tom," she started, then stopped, her voice barely above a whisper. James cleared his throat, a sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Right. Well, that's quite a story," he said, his usual bravado notably absent. "Your grandfather sounds like a remarkable man." It was the kind of thing people say when they don't know what else to say, but at least it was respectful. I could see the others nodding along, murmuring agreement, their earlier amusement replaced by something closer to shame. "He was," I replied simply, "though he'd have laughed if you'd called him remarkable. He always said he was just doing his job." Sophie, who'd been so quick with her cutting remarks earlier, was now studying the medal with what appeared to be genuine interest. "Distinguished Flying Cross," she said quietly. "That's quite prestigious, isn't it? Not something they handed out lightly." "No," I confirmed. "You had to perform acts of valor whilst flying in active operations." Grandad earned his for continuing to engage enemy fighters after his plane had been damaged, allowing the rest of his squadron to complete their mission safely. Marcus, who'd called it a trinket moments before, was looking distinctly uncomfortable. His usual confidence had evaporated, leaving him looking younger and somehow diminished. "I had no idea," he mumbled. "The historical significance, I mean." But it wasn't really about historical significance, was it? It was about understanding the difference between price and value, between what something costs and what it's worth. Looking around the room at these people with their expensive educations and their comfortable assumptions, I realized that this was a distinction they'd probably never had to make. Sarah finally spoke, her voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. "Tom, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I mean, you didn't explain. You didn't give me a chance to explain," I said, not unkindly but firmly. "You saw something that didn't look expensive and you laughed." The words hung in the air like an accusation, which I suppose they were. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and I felt a stab of guilt for causing her pain. But the truth was the truth, and I was tired of pretending otherwise. "I've made a terrible mistake," she whispered, looking down at the medal again. "This is priceless, isn't it? Not in money, but in what it represents." I nodded slowly. "To me, yes. It's the only link I have left to him, to his story. I wanted to share that with you because—" I paused, struggling to find the right words, "because I thought it mattered more than all this." I gestured around the room, taking in the expensive furnishings, the designer clothes, the casual wealth that surrounded us. The other guests were beginning to drift away from our little drama, returning to their conversations in subdued tones. The caterers resumed their work with professional discretion, but Sarah remained frozen, the medal still cradled in her hands. "What does this mean?" she asked eventually. "For us, I mean?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself since the laughter had started. What did it mean when someone you cared about revealed such a fundamental misunderstanding of who you were and what you valued? "I don't know," I admitted. "I thought I was sharing something precious with someone I was falling in love with. Instead, I ended up feeling like a museum exhibit being mocked by tourists." Sarah flinched at the comparison, but she didn't deny its accuracy. "I can't undo what happened," she said, "but I want to understand. I want to know about your grandfather, about you. Really know, not just the surface things." I looked at her closely, trying to read the sincerity in her voice. She seemed genuinely distressed, genuinely remorseful. But was it enough? Could you build a relationship on good intentions and second chances? "Tell me about him," she said, settling onto the sofa and patting the space beside her. "Tell me about Charlie Williams." The room had mostly returned to normal now, the other guests tactfully giving us space while maintaining the pretense of a continuing party. I sat down beside Sarah, close enough to smell her perfume but far enough away to maintain some distance. "Where do I start?" I said, surprised by my own willingness to continue after what had happened. But maybe that was what love was. The foolish hope that people could change, could learn, could become better than they were. "Start at the beginning," Sarah said. "Start with the boy who became a hero." So I did. I told her about Charlie Williams at 18, barely out of school, signing up to fight because it was the right thing to do. I told her about the training, the camaraderie, the terror of those first missions over France. I told her about the friends who didn't come home, whose names were carved into memorials that no one visited anymore. As I spoke, I watched Sarah's face change. The superficial beauty was still there, but something deeper was emerging, a capacity for understanding that I hadn't seen before. She asked questions, good questions that showed she was really listening. "What was he like after the war?" she asked. "Different," I said. "Quieter, but he never became bitter, never complained. He'd take me to the Imperial War Museum sometimes, show me the Spitfire they had on display. 'That's what we flew,' he'd say, as if it was the most natural thing in the world." "Did he ever talk about being afraid?" "Once," I said, remembering. "I was about 12, going through a phase where I was scared of everything. Dogs, heights, the dark. He sat me down and told me that courage wasn't about not being afraid. It was about being afraid and doing what needed to be done anyway." Sarah was crying now, tears running silently down her cheeks. "I wish I'd known him," she said. "He'd have liked you," I said, though I wasn't entirely sure it was true. Granddad had little patience for pretension, but he'd always been kind to people who were genuinely trying. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the medal resting between us on the sofa. Around us, the party continued, but we seemed to exist in our own small bubble of understanding. "I want to make this right," Sarah said eventually. "I don't know how, but I want to try." "You can't," I said gently. "What happened, happened, but maybe we can learn from it." She nodded, wiping her eyes with a tissue someone had provided. "What do you need from me?" It was a good question, and one that deserved a thoughtful answer. What did I need? An apology? Understanding? A promise that it wouldn't happen again? "I need to know that you understand the difference," I said finally, "between what something costs and what it's worth, between what's valuable and what's just expensive." "I'm beginning to," she said, "but I think I have a lot to learn." That, at least, felt honest. And maybe that was enough for now. The recognition that there was learning to be done, understanding to be built, bridges to be constructed between our very different worlds. The metal caught the light from the chandelier, its bronze surface warm and alive. For the first time since I'd pulled it from my pocket, it looked like what it was, not just a piece of metal, but a symbol of everything worth fighting for. 3 weeks later, I stood in the same spot where I'd been humiliated, but everything felt different. The October rain had given way to November frost, and Sarah's flat looked somehow smaller, less intimidating than it had that night. She'd asked me to come round, said she had something important to show me. "I've been doing some research," she said, as she led me into the living room. The coffee table was covered with papers, photographs, and what looked like official documents. "About your grandfather." I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. "Sarah, you don't need to—" "Please," she interrupted. "Let me show you what I found." She'd been thorough. I had to give her that. There were printouts from the National Archives, photographs from the Imperial War Museum, even a copy of the London Gazette from 1941 announcing his medal citation. But it was the folder she handed me that made my hands shake. "I contacted the RAF Museum," she said quietly. "They have more detailed records." Inside were documents I'd never seen before. Flight logs in my grandfather's handwriting, a letter he'd written to his mother after being shot down, a photograph of him with his squadron, young faces grinning at the camera, most of them barely out of their teens. But it was the final document that stopped my breath entirely. "They have a record of his final mission," Sarah said, "the one that ended the war for him." I stared at the typed report, the formal language barely containing the drama it described. "Flight Lieutenant Charles Williams, leading a formation of 6 Spitfires on a reconnaissance mission over occupied France, attacked by overwhelming enemy forces. His wingman shot down and bailed out over enemy territory." The report was clinical, factual, but between the lines, I could read the story. My grandfather, alone and outnumbered, drawing enemy fire away from his downed comrade, circling back again and again despite a damaged engine, despite being low on fuel, despite the odds stacked impossibly against him. "He stayed until the rescue boat arrived," I read aloud. 40 minutes over enemy waters, fighting off repeated attacks. "The wingman survived," Sarah said softly, "because your grandfather refused to leave him." I'd known my grandfather was brave. I'd known he was a good man, but seeing it laid out in official documents, seeing the precise details of his heroism, made it real in a way that family stories never could. "There's more," Sarah said, turning to another page. "After the war, he was offered a commission, a chance to stay in the RAF as an officer, full pension, career prospects, everything." I looked at her, puzzled. "He never mentioned that." "Because he turned it down," she said. "Came back to London, worked in the docks. Do you know why?" I shook my head, though I was beginning to suspect. Sarah handed me another document, a letter from the Air Ministry, dated 1946. My grandfather's response to their offer, written in the same careful handwriting I remembered from birthday cards. "While I am honored by your offer," I read, "I must respectfully decline. My duty now is to my family and my community. The war is over, and there are children who need fathers, streets that need rebuilding, and lives that need mending. I can serve my country better with a docker's hook than with a pilot's wings." The room was very quiet. Outside, I could hear the distant hum of London traffic, the same city my grandfather had helped save, then spent his life rebuilding. "He could have been a war hero," Sarah said. "Air Commodore Williams, decorated officer, comfortable pension. But he chose to come home and be Charlie Williams, docker, because that's what his community needed." I understood then why Sarah had done this research, why she'd needed to show me these documents. It wasn't just about the medal anymore. It was about understanding the kind of man my grandfather really was, and by extension, the kind of man I was trying to be. "I've been thinking about that night," Sarah continued, her voice careful and measured, "about why I laughed, why none of us understood what you were trying to tell us." I waited, giving her space to work through whatever she'd discovered. "We've never had to think about the difference between price and value," she said. "Everything in our lives has been expensive, so we assumed that made it valuable. But your grandfather knew better, didn't he? He knew that the most precious things can't be bought." She picked up the medal from where I'd placed it on the table, handling it with a reverence that had been entirely absent 3 weeks ago. "This isn't just a piece of bronze," she said. "It's proof that courage exists, that people will sacrifice everything for strangers they'll never meet, that love of country and duty to others can overcome fear and self-preservation." "Yes," I said simply, and when I laughed at it, I was laughing at all of that, at the idea that those things matter more than money or status or the right handbag. The honesty in her voice was painful, but necessary. We were finally talking about what had really happened that night, the deeper currents that had been running beneath the surface. "I want to change," Sarah said. "Not just for you, but for me. I want to understand what your grandfather understood. I want to value what he valued." It was a beautiful sentiment, but change is harder than intention. "What does that look like?" I asked. She gestured to the papers spread across the table. "I've applied to do pro bono work at a legal aid clinic in East London. I want to use my skills to help people who actually need help, not just corporations trying to avoid taxes." I was impressed, despite myself. "That's a big step." "It's a start," she said. "I know I can't undo what happened, can't unsay what was said, but I can try to become someone worthy of this story, worthy of what your grandfather represents." She held out the medal to me, but I shook my head. "Keep it," I said, "for now, until you understand what it really means." Her eyes widened. "Tom, I can't. It's priceless to you." "Exactly," I said, "which is why I'm trusting you with it. Not because of what it cost nothing, but because of what it's worth." Sarah cradled the medal against her chest, and I could see she finally understood the weight of what she was holding. Not just a piece of metal, but a legacy, a reminder that the best of humanity isn't found in boardrooms or auction houses, but in the quiet courage of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank my grandfather," I said. "And maybe, someday, thank the boy who grew up hearing his stories and decided they mattered more than fitting in with people who measure worth in pound signs." 6 months later, Sarah and I were still together, still learning from each other. She'd kept her word about the legal clinic, was working with refugees and families facing eviction. The designer clothes had given way to more practical outfits, the expensive restaurants to pub lunches and walks along the Thames. And sometimes, when she thought I wasn't watching, I'd catch her holding the medal, studying it like a talisman, learning slowly but surely the difference between what something costs and what it's worth. My grandfather had saved more than just his wingman that day over the English Channel. 40 years after his death, he was still saving people, still teaching them about courage and sacrifice, and the things that really matter. The medal sits on Sarah's mantelpiece now, not as decoration but as reminder. A reminder that the most valuable gifts can't be bought, can't be wrapped in expensive paper, can't be measured in pounds and pence. Sometimes the most precious thing you can give someone is the story of who you are, and the hope that they'll understand why it matters.